So we'll get started. So good afternoon, good morning, good evening from wherever you are. My name is Nisha Krishnan, and I manage the Community Resilience Partnership Program at ADB. So welcome and thank you for joining us for the fourth in a series called CRPP Talks. The CRPP is a regional partnership program housed at ADB and implemented in partnership with Huairou Commission, which is a global network of grassroots women's groups, as well as the International Institute for Environment and Development, a think tank that's well known for its work on local level adaptation. We focus on scaling up local level adaptation solutions, particularly those through government systems that address the nexus of climate, poverty, and gender. We host these webinars on a regular basis, focusing on showcasing innovative ways that we could scale up local level adaptation, particularly those that can reach most poor and vulnerable communities at scale. Today's webinar will actually feature experts from the BRAC network who will share their experience on how you can build climate resilience through poverty graduation programs. But before we get started, we kind of wanted to actually ask you two questions very quickly to kind of understand your level of knowledge and understanding right now of both poverty graduation as well as climate adaptation. So one, if you could launch the first quiz that will come up on Zoom, if you could select, sorry, I think this is has your understanding of how graduation, if I could just ask Timmy to relaunch the quiz with the right question, which is, how familiar are you with poverty graduation programs? Which is the first question that should appear. We'll just give it a second. In any case, maybe we'll skip the questions for now and we'll come back to it. Oh, there you are. So how familiar are you with poverty graduation programs? If you could choose whether you're familiar, slightly familiar, somewhat familiar, very familiar. And then second, how familiar are you with climate adaptation measures that target poor and vulnerable communities? So we can vote for your answers for now, and then we'll come back to this at the end of the session as well. Give people a few more minutes. Great. So maybe with that, I will actually introduce our speakers for today and then hand it over to them because they are the main stars of the show. So today we are joined by Baudi from BRAC, who works as a specialist graduation program design specialist at BRAC International's Ultra Poor Graduation Initiative. He works closely with colleagues and governments in India and Rwanda to design these government-led graduation programs. And he covers as well the expertise around climate resilience and urban graduation. We will also be joined by his colleague, Muzammil Haq, who currently serves as the program manager for the Rain for Life project under BRAC's climate change program, where he leads the end-to-end implementation of climate resilience programs. And lastly, we'll also be joined by my colleague, Palak Rawal, from the Human and Social Development Sector Group at ADB, and she's a social development specialist who specializes in economic inclusion programs, and she'll be the respondent to the presentation. With that, maybe I'll hand over to Baudi to get started and to walk us through BRAC's approach to this issue. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you. Thank you also for the opportunity to present about BRAC's work on graduation. So for today, I will briefly explain what graduation programs are actually about and how they are reducing poverty and a link with climate resilience. And then we get some examples from Muzammil Bhai, like my colleague from Bangladesh, and also I will share some examples on how we are addressing climate resilience in India. If we can go to the next slide, please. So this is the overview of the four core areas that I will present. And if we go to the next slide, then I will show a little bit about how it all started for us at BRAC. So when we were, BRAC is started in the 70s with all kinds of development programs. And 20, 30 years later, in the late 1990s, we found out that quite a number of the people we worked with were left out of the programs, of microfinance programs. And we saw that they face so many different vulnerabilities and multiple barriers at once that extreme poverty persists because they live in a poverty trap. So if we think about these barriers, it's about maybe access to education, it is living in the most remote areas, food security and nutrition challenges, but of course also climate risks and climate hazards. We knew that if we want to address all of these challenges or barriers at once, that we had to come up with a new kind of program that is actually addressing all these barriers. So if we go to the next slide, we see that there are quite a number, of course, development programs already by that time. And of course, these programs are very useful in supporting communities living in poverty, but we saw that for the most vulnerable, those programs, those piecemeal approaches have fallen short. We had to come up with a program that is addressing all these kind of different challenges. So for example, when we're thinking about providing a productive asset, people living in extreme poverty cannot capitalize actually on those productive assets, because if their basic needs are not met, like they have to pay like education, the school fees or some health bills, often they sell off the asset because they have to make their basic needs. Similarly, if we think about providing only support to basic needs, that will support them, like the consumption support sustains, but it's not helping them to actually earn more income over time. So it's supporting them with their basic needs, but like seeing a progress over time, that is not really happening for the most vulnerable. And the last part is, I think, the coaching to start, for example, a micro enterprise. We saw that quite a number of them, they improved their knowledge, but that alone would not translate to sustain new livelihoods, and especially for women. So all those development programs that were supporting quite a number of people living in poverty were successful for that group, but we saw that for the people living in extreme poverty, the most vulnerable, we had to come up with a new program that is actually addressing all of these different approaches. If we go to the next slide, then we actually see that we designed then this graduation program, as we call it, where we call it the ABC. So that's a core of graduation programming. It's the assets, the basic needs, and the coaching, which means that we provide an asset, which is a productive, large investment in income generating activities. We have to be from basic needs to ensure that families can make ends meet until new livelihoods generate sufficient income, but also to stabilize those households. Because what we often see is when they're in joining the program, they often lack confidence. They are not familiar with taking up any livelihoods to income generating activities. The aspirations need to be built. All those kind of challenges we see for the most vulnerable who are excluded from other kinds of programs. And it takes some time actually to start thinking about what kind of livelihood they can take up. And stabilizing those households by providing basic needs will give them space to actually think about what a future could look like. And that is all done through the C of coaching, where we see like there's intensive, frequent coaching that unlocks agency, know-how, and hope. And I think hope is also something that is more difficult maybe to measure, but it is one of the key areas actually that in which the graduation program is working. Because if you have the feeling that change is actually possible, then you will start thinking about what kind of things you can actually do in the future to change your life. And I think for the most vulnerable, that is something that takes quite some time, and that is something that is key at the same time, where coaches do a great job to actually create that hope among the households we work with. So if we go to the next slide, here you see again those three areas: the asset, the basic needs, and coaching, and how they relate to each other. So it's not that it is something that we just implement independent of each other. It is about that sequence of the different areas. And you also see that here it is time bound, so it's up to 2 years, and adaptive in the sense also that it's iterative, like we're repeating the similar kinds of programs of the same interventions and see like what is working and what can be improved. So to start again with the coaching, it is where a coach is visiting actually a household, and you see that the coaching is there from the program start up to year 2, which is there for the whole period of the program, but it will change over time, right? So in the beginning, it's about building confidence, thinking about aspirations, what kind of changes the households would like to see in the future. But at a later stage, once the confidence is built and the aspirations are there, the livelihood is taking off, then it also will change into more livelihood training, but maybe also coaching on life skills like nutrition, food security, WASH, gender-based violence. Like there's so many different topics that can be included in the program here. Again, you see the basic needs. So the support to basic needs is there from the beginning of the program, and it is overlapping with the time that the productive asset transfer is done, because we know, like what I said in the beginning, it's very important to stabilize the households so they have like space to actually think about like what kind of livelihood they would like to pursue in the program. But also once they start with their livelihood, for example, if they chose livestock, then often it takes some time before that livestock starts generating income. And up to that moment, the basic needs are provided to the households. So here you see the sequence is very important. The time bound you see here up to 2 years. A standard graduation program is actually up to 2 years, 24 months. But we see that sometimes in certain areas, like for example, in urban areas, sometimes it can be done a little bit quicker because the households in urban areas know better what kind of livelihood they want to take up, and they can move faster to the livelihood program. But sometimes it also takes a little bit longer if we are working in very remote areas and we need more time to actually implement all the different activities in the program. Yes, please, to the next slide. I already briefly mentioned the start of graduation programming, which was in 2002, following the 1990s, when we found out that quite a number of people were left out of our microfinance programs in Bangladesh. So that is the reason that we, based on that kind of research, we founded the Ultra Poor Graduation Program in 2002. And we're learning along the way on how we could best implement. And 7 years later, we started the first implementation of a graduation program outside Bangladesh, which was actually in Afghanistan through BRAC International. And if you see 6 more years later, that was 2015, which was a very important year for us at BRAC, because there were 2 very important studies that came out. One was actually from a graduation program that was implemented in 6 countries across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, showing the same results as we saw in Bangladesh, which actually showed us that graduation was not something that would only work in Bangladesh, but that would also work outside Bangladesh, which helped us to think about like, okay, this is something that maybe we're on to something that is really changing the lives of people living in extreme poverty. And at the same time, there was also a study from the London School of Economics that was published that showed the long-term impacts of the UPG program in Bangladesh, where we saw that even 7 years after the participants or the households graduated from poverty and were not part of the program anymore, they were still doing better than the control group that didn't participate in the program. So we saw that graduation was not something that showed impact in the short term, like just during the duration or just right after the program, but that it was actually also showing impact way longer after the program ended for the participants. So those 2 studies actually helped us think about, like in 2016, we want to start the Ultra Poor Graduation Initiative. It was launched to provide technical assistance to partners implementing graduation. We like, okay, this is something that is working not only in Bangladesh, but also outside Bangladesh. And this is also something that actually has long-term impacts. So we would like to support other organizations and also governments, especially governments, to take up graduation as part to reduce poverty in their countries. That was generally first done as technical assistance to countries. And in 2020, we in Bangladesh, we reached more than 9 million people in Bangladesh, which is a big number, of course, and we're still counting. This is 5 years ago, so we are, someone probably can help a little bit more with the numbers, how many people we actually reach right now in Bangladesh. And also the Ultra Poor Graduation Initiative was named the Audacious Project, which changed our strategy, that we now have like country teams in 7 different countries, where we are working very closely with governments to scale the graduation program. Because we know now that graduation is actually a very good tool to reduce poverty. But we also know that NGOs are only able to reach out to a couple of thousand people. And if we really want to scale the approach, we have to work with governments so that they can take it up and that they can also scale the program in their countries. Yeah, so this is very briefly the evolution of graduation at BRAC and the journey to UPGI. It's going back like over 20 years, and we're still growing. To the next slide, please. So from the graduation program in itself to how graduation is actually building climate resilience, right? So I think what we see is that graduation is specifically designed, and I think this is also key, to support the most vulnerable people living in extreme poverty. So if we think about how graduation is actually building climate resilience, I put here some examples from the research that's already out there. We see that evidence from different countries and contexts show that the graduation approach is reducing the negative impacts of climate change. Like, for example, what we saw in Ethiopia is that when we added a light touch graduation-like program into a government social safety net program, it reduced, or at least eliminated the negative impacts of seasonal droughts on food security, nutrition, livestock holdings, and intimate partner violence. Similarly, in Bangladesh, we saw that the graduation program actually decreased vulnerability to floods and droughts. And we saw that with more disaster-prone households, so where they were impacted more by the floods and the droughts, were prioritizing savings over long-term investments. So they actually used their savings to cope with those shocks. And we also saw like that the integrating of conditional loans or weather-based insurance could help households adapt more effectively to climate change. So how does this actually work, right? Like, how is actually graduation building climate resilience? We saw like 3 areas in the way that it's done. So it is reducing vulnerability to climate-related disasters by enabling people to diversify their income, which often means that they move away from their reliance on more vulnerable rain-fed agriculture. They save more because of the income generation of the graduation program, which they can use to cope with shocks, and they build the skills, knowledge, and awareness to prepare for these kind of shocks. So those are actually the 3 areas in which graduation programs are building climate resilience. This shows that if we think about the graduation program, even before we include any climate resilience adaptations, enables households to be resilient to, for example, unexpected flooding and drought events. So this means, and I think this is also a key area, is that investing in graduation and in this way in poverty reduction promotes climate resilience, right? So by reducing poverty, this also leads to more climate resilience among the households. But even then, that said, like also the example from Bangladesh shows that climate resilient measures will still help households to adapt more effectively to climate change. So I think that's also a key area. And in this slide, I would like to end with a quote of our founder, Abid Bai, which I think is actually summarizing it quite well. He said, "Disasters don't kill people, poverty does." Right? So because people living in poverty, they don't have the means to actually cope with the shocks that are happening to them. If we go to the next slide, I will explain briefly about the ongoing research. So there are still a wide range of climate hazards, right? And for example, heat, floods, and droughts are impacting communities in various ways. And that makes it also more difficult to generalize the findings of the different studies. I would like to share a couple of studies that are actually ongoing on graduation and climate resilience. The first one is about the impact of graduation on household resilience to climate events in Malawi and Ethiopia. Another thing in Bangladesh, what we're looking at is what the effectiveness of adjustments in BRAC's graduation program at promoting local climate adaptations. The third area is also from Bangladesh, where we explore how households actually experience the effects of climate change on their lives and how they are adjusting their behavior in response. And the last area is, and I think this is also becoming more and more important, thinking about urban areas. So how can we shape climate adaptation in the context of urban graduation? This is the ongoing research. I think even more research is needed, right? So for example, like which livelihoods are viable for areas hit by different types of shocks, like heat, floods, and droughts, and what degree of diversification leads to the highest resilience, like if we think about livelihood diversification. And those are just two areas which I think are interesting and worthwhile exploring, but there are many more areas. I think so much more research is actually required. Then I hand over to Muzammubai to share more about the work in Bangladesh.
Thanks, Faidebai. Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. This is Muzammel Haq. As you know that every year Bangladesh faces unprecedented multiple extreme climatic events, such as the cyclone, flood, and extreme event. And last year, cyclone Remal hit Bangladesh and destroyed a number of household, embankment, and asset. In this picture, you see the UPG participant was standing over the household after the Remal, and UPG program calculated that the last year UPG spent around 10% expenditure increase in operation for climate vulnerability. And in the wake of intensifying climatic event, UPG program has increasingly recognized the urgency of embedding the climate resilience into its core strategy. Please, next slide. Journey towards climate resilient program. UPG program has been working climate change issues since 2012 to 2015, addressing the climate change restitution program, recognizing and responding to the climate change related restitution in coastal vulnerable household. And 2016 to 2017, UPG program learning during this phase, lessons were gathered from the earlier intervention, and program design were refined a climate perspective, and climate change consideration was systematically integrated into the UPG program, making a core part of planning and implementation in 2018 to 2021. And last cohort UPG program implementing tailored intervention based on the different geographic vulnerability and thematic cluster. And this cohort UPG program designed cluster-specific approaches to strengthen their UPG participant. And as you know, the Bangladesh has different vulnerability in different types of areas and climate hotspot areas. And what next? UPG program 2026-2017, UPG program has a plan to more concentration for climate resilience program, as I explained later. Would you please next slide, go to the next slide. And you know that everybody knows that UPG program strictly follows the some important steps from targeting to graduations, target-based climate vulnerability and target groups. UPG program identify their priorities, poverty pocket, and including indigenous community and the disabled group, the most climate vulnerable region, especially those exposed to recurrent floods, salinity, cyclone, and drought area for focus support and interventions. And also UPG, the intervention incorporating the climate adaptive and best practices integrated the locally appropriate and scientifically proven that are already integrated with the in the operation and different types of sector, and include the anticipated action plan and preparedness measure before the climate-induced disaster and the rapid support, including the asset recovery and food security. As said, Bardovine mentioned before, the income restoration and immediately after a shock minimize the long-term impact on participants. And continuous training and hands-on guidance are provided to the field staff and the participant to strengthen their knowledge, skills, and ability to implement the monitor and sustain climate resilient practice in diverse contexts. How we build the awareness raising to the community. Regular interactive session, educate the participant on climate risk, climate adaptation, early warning, and, and sustainable resource uses, empowering them to make informed decisions for their well-being and livelihood. And, and a revised graduation criteria based on the climate resilient framework. UPG program has dedicatedly climate resilient indicator, including the graduations benchmark, such as the household ability to withstand and recover from the climate shock, recurrent current shock, climate shocks, and adoption of adaptive practices there, and sustainable livelihood diversifications. Please, next slide. Cluster-wise program design. UPG now operate on a cluster-wise approach, tailoring intervention based on the geographical vulnerability and social context. A total 42 vulnerable districts working this current cohort out of 64 districts in Bangladesh. These districts selected based on the National Adaptation Plan. We sometimes cross-check with the National Adaptation Plan and also the Climate Vulnerability Index recently published by the Bangladesh government through UNDP, and UPG program has undertaken a paradigm shift, integrating the climate change adaptation across its operation cluster, urban, rural, and also, the peri-urban area. We are working on that. And next slide. Adaptation strategy vary between urban, rural based on their unique contexts, resources, and access to services. Especially climate and weather information, urban area often focus on extreme heat reduce, urban flood and infrastructure, and service-based solution. While rural area are mostly focused on agriculture, water management, food security, and also we are approaching locally led adaptation and ecosystem-based approaches. And peri-urban area is the common, sometimes we find the common criteria, common elements of both urban and rural area, which are requiring the modified solution that address the overlapping challenges and opportunity in urban and rural settings. Next slide. UPG program has successfully implemented a number of adaptation techniques for urban and rural area, but there are so many adaptation techniques are in the field right now. There are few of them in rural area. The first picture, you see the manure management. Our participants mostly use the livestock and agriculture practices, but we teach them the proper manure management, reduce the greenhouse gas emission, and improve soil fertility for climate resilient agriculture. And also the second, integrated rice fish farming practices enhances food security and optimize water in coastal area. We did it, we practice in right now in the coastal area. And next, the drip irrigation technique ensure the efficient water use and support crop in the drought prone area. The drip irrigation technique is scientifically approved from the government and also local NGOs and our participant practicing in the drought prone area, how the drip irrigation effective in the plants root zone effective way, because of the surface water and the irrigation crisis in Parin area or northwest part of Bangladesh. And we have another part of Bangladesh, the northeast, or also riverine area. The floating vegetable allow crop production in the waterlogged and flood affected area. Because the flash flood are sometimes happening in this area. That all our enterprises or asset are flooding away due to the sudden flash flood. And next one, alternative wetting and drying method is a water management technique, which is conserve water in the rice cultivation while maintaining the productivity. Because of our farmers using very traditional irrigation technique in their agricultural field, but the government and our participant, and also we are providing the AWO method to our participant, how the measure their irrigation or measure their water availability in their agriculture field. And next one, the portable, next one, our program also take an inclusive adaptation measure, improve the accessibility and also resilience for the disabled person. Our working area is the disability inclusion, and in our all urban and rural area, we are also focusing. That's why their adaptation is different. We are considering the modified adaptation for the disabled persons. And next slides. This all are picture for urban intervention, but very few other intervention are here. But we are only focusing some of them. The extreme heat are occurring right last couple of consecutive year. That's why our participant using the fuel paper to reduce their indoor temperature, improve the heat resilience in the urban area. And our electricity is not available in urban settlement, or or sometimes disruption electricity are not profound in our country. Small scale solar home system are providing clean and reliable energy solution in slum area where electricity are not available or disruptions. And next one, urban household are growing vegetable on rooftop to enhance the food security and nutrition to meet the household demand of their productions within a very small scales. And next, rest of them they're selling to the local market or other consumptions. A small scale paper making business or recycling paper, which is very, we are focusing also green businesses from the UPG program. Is creating livelihood while promoting, we are also promoting the eco-friendly packaging for our participant practicing in the urban area. And household vegetable gardening practicing in a small scale where they are getting in a very small space. They are practicing the household level homestead vegetable to ensure the nutrition and the income. And sometimes the program create a small space in urban context for pigeon rearing or poultry farming, and is supporting urban household with an alternative source of protein and income. These are all a picture for the urban interventions. And next slides. And all this adaptation technique maintaining the 5 key criteria. Number one, the context specific, the solution must be tailored to the local context, culture, and climate risk. And second one, the intervention should be tangible, measurable, and improvement in resilient livelihood. And third one, the all intervention we try to figure it out. The intervention must promote ecological sustainability and conserving resources and reducing the environmental harm. Actually, we are following the do no harm policy within our UPG program. And fourth one, the scalable adaptation technique should be adaptable, replicable. Our adaptation we try to replicable to the other area or other larger population. They are trying to implementing the others in other program area or others climate affected area. That's why our successful adaptation technique, we try to scalable to other regions. And finally, the solution should be long lasting and community owned and economically viable beyond the project support. When the all five criteria are considering that to ensure the intervention are impactful, inclusive, and aligned with the long-term climate resilient goal. Based on this criteria, UPG program UPG program call for a climate innovation award everywhere, and jury board the maintaining these five criteria to find out the best climate adaptation options from the field. And this through its climate resilient graduation program, but program is empowering the vulnerable community to adapt, thrive, and build sustainable livelihood in the face of escalating climate challenges. This is my overview of presentation from Bangladesh. Thank you, everyone. Please, later on for experience of India.
Thank you, Mr. Mubay. I will keep it short so that we have enough time also for Q&A. So in addition to some examples from Bangladesh, I would like to share a couple of approaches from India. I will not be able to be comprehensive to share everything. In India, we focus on climate resilient livelihoods, coaching on climate change, thinking about financial solutions like parametric insurance, and more community level approaches like locally led adaptation. Today, I will just only talk about coaching and the parametric insurance. And that's because coaching on climate change is for us about a changing behavior towards a more shock prone world. And the more innovative solutions are also required that are offering, like, for example, parametric insurance that will also build climate resilience. So if we go to the next slide. So I think for our work in India, we see how heat waves, droughts, and floods are impacting not only livelihoods, but also health and housing infrastructure. And of course, these shocks are not new. And many rural communities have been experiencing those kind of shocks already for decades. But that said, due to climate change, the frequency and severity of these shocks are increasing. And there are different ways in which we describe and understand these changes. That's the reason we said, okay, there is a need actually for us to create a common language and understanding of climate change so that we are talking about the same things. And this will also allow communities to express themselves and understand the impacts of climate change, but also to build confidence that climate change is not something that is just happening to them, but that they can become climate resilient when they prepare for, cope with, and adapt to these effects. So in graduation programs, we're developing a climate module, and then the coaches will be trained on this module. And here you see an example of one of those modules. And it is, for me, a good example of both top-down and bottom-up approaches. So you see if the coach is discussing, in this case, a heat wave with the community, they will go through the three main livelihood opportunities that we actually offer in graduation programs, like agriculture, non-agriculture, which are often micro-enterprises, and also livestock. And the community is addressing how heat waves are actually impacting those type of livelihoods. And then secondly, they discuss what are existing coping strategies or coping mechanisms that they already practice in the community, and they can also learn from each other, which is the bottom-up approach. And then the coach is then also offering additional options like small cold storage in case of heat waves, or open shelters with cooling options. So in this way, we are coaching on climate change and make sure that communities feel confident that they actually can do something about a changing climate. The other example, if we go to the next slide, is about parametric insurance. This is I could do this as a whole presentation by itself, right? So I will just briefly touch upon this. If we're thinking about climate hazards such as heat, floods, and droughts, they're impacting the livelihoods of community living in extreme poverty. We often see that households face a reduction in income. For example, that there's a lower customer turnout at their vegetable shop during floods, or higher expenses, like, for example, increased health expenditure during heat waves. And we thought, like, is there something that we can actually do about it? We know that more traditional insurance covers actual loss of an asset, and the payment is made after an assessment is carried out, which can take quite some time. Especially if you see like lower customer turnout, that's more difficult to measure in that assessment. So parametric insurance is not related to an actual loss, but it pays out when a certain trigger is met. And that trigger, I think you can see as similar to more shock responsive social protection triggers that maybe some of you are also familiar with. And the purpose or the aim of this parametric insurance is to let the households bounce back to the position they were prior to the event, and then compensating for the reduction in income and increased expenditure. To end with like a very practical example for what a parametric heat insurance product would look like, if we think about the three core areas, the first one is the premium amount. For example, the parametric insurance is offered around for 250 rupees, which is approximately $3. Then there is a threshold and a trigger. So the insurance companies are actually paying out when the temperature is, for example, above 40 degrees for 2 consecutive days. And when that actually happens, the clients will receive a payout of also, again, for example, 1,500 rupees, which is around 1,750 when that threshold is triggered. And that is just helping them to cope with that loss in their livelihood income, but also maybe increased expenditure. So those kind of things we can also think about when we're exploring climate resilience. And these are the solutions we are actually looking at. There are quite a number of organizations in India, like, for example, SEBA and Mahila Housing Trust, that are already practicing or piloting this parametric insurance, and we also try to learn from them. So wrapping up, I think for me, there are 3 key points for today. I think the graduation program, like how I explained in the beginning, is a program for the most vulnerable, who are also often the most affected by climate change, right? So that is the reason that we have a very comprehensive program that is addressing all those different vulnerabilities, because we have to address them for the most vulnerable people living in extreme poverty. Second is that graduation programs, through their way in reducing poverty, and even without any climate change adaptation, are already building climate resilience to some extent, right? And the third component is that if we really want to be serious about poverty reduction and climate resilience, then specific climate resilient measures will actually help those households to adapt more effectively to climate change. And we need to embed that also in graduation programs. Of course, like what Musawabai was sharing about the livelihood adaptations, but also coaching on climate change, or, for example, parametric insurance. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, colleagues from BRAC, for that very comprehensive look at the evolution of ultra-poor graduation programs, where that came from, but also how we're integrating or thinking about integrating climate resilience into this, into basically all aspects of the ABC framework that you laid out, right? So the asset building, the basic needs, and also the coaching aspects of it. Now I'll just hand over to Palak, I think, to give us a little bit of an overview of how we're thinking about it at ADB, how some of these lessons are already coming to life. So Palak, over to you.
Thank you, Nisha, and thank you so much to the BRAC team for a very comprehensive presentation and laying that groundwork for us. I'll just take a couple of minutes because I see some very interesting questions that have come up in the chat as well, and we want to leave time for that. So for the audience's context, ADB has been investing in poverty graduation programs, or what we often broadly refer to as economic inclusion programs, since 2018. We follow a similar framework which provides a very holistic set of interventions spanning social protection, livelihoods and jobs promotion, financial inclusion, and social empowerment. As of today, we have around 10 active poverty graduation programs across 7 countries in the Asia and the Pacific. Now, these programs have a huge potential, as was also mentioned by the BRAC team, because they provide this comprehensive, tailored, and evidence-backed approach to poverty reduction. And we've been seeing very successful outcomes from the graduation programs that have been completed and supported by ADB in the Philippines, in Mongolia, and other contexts. Initially, we started with targeting the extreme poorest or the poorest among all. But over time, these programs now also tackle other vulnerable groups, such as those near the poverty line who are at risk of falling back into poverty given shocks, be they related to climate or life cycle events or economic risks. And at ADB, from the set of programs that we've been supporting, they integrate across multiple sectors. So social protection is the most common of all, but we also have graduation programs that embed within urban development programs, rural development programs, resettlement type programs. So it really can cater to a wide range of contexts and is really tailored to vulnerabilities. As Brack also mentioned, increasingly governments are now interested in achieving the dual objectives of reducing poverty and building climate resilience, which is why we now go beyond the standard design to help integrate climate resilience fundamentally and institutionally. For example, we recently launched a climate resilient and gender responsive poverty graduation program in Lao PDR. And some key features of that include firstly, embedding climate vulnerability data for targeting both in terms of location and target groups. And I also saw a question in the chat about targeting itself. Another key feature of that program is starting with a district level climate risk assessment, which will be used to understand all the key climate risks and development actions that impact the target communities, and how the entire program design can be informed using the climate risks informed from that assessment, be it the kinds of livelihoods, the kind of technical trainings, agriculture practices, coaching, etc. And lastly, it really adopts an institutional approach, looking beyond a household level intervention driven program to really seeing how these programs can strengthen shock responsiveness and link with resilient systems at large. So these are really some interesting ways in which we are strengthening the work on climate resilience in economic inclusion programs across the different countries that we're working in. We will now move to the Q&A. We see a lot of interesting questions that have come up. Thank you so much for sharing those. I'll start with the most commonly raised question, which is around measurement of climate resilience, the kind of indicators that are used, and the kind of approaches. So if I can request the BRAC speakers to kindly shed light on the metrics or indicators that you use to measure climate resilience or resilience at large in your programs. Over to you.
Musama, I think you are best placed to answer this also from the Bangladesh experience.
Okay, all of you know that Bangladesh, the climate resilient measure is very difficult, but Bangladesh BRAC climate change program identify the few measures in the climate change program developed the climate resilient framework of BRAC. The four pillar there mentioned identified. The number one, the adaptive capacities, number two, anticipatory capacity, and number three, the absorptive capacity. As you know, the what type of vulnerabilities or hazard are there in the community, they are how much they are absorbing in the vulnerable of the local areas. And fourth one, the transformative pillar is the transition of the capacity building for their household to measure the actually it is this, it's creating a score type of information, how they get the mark out of their specific number, they achieve the number they identified from the meal team or the BIGD identified that through the climate resilient framework. And from the UPG program, we identified or we have, I mentioned earlier, we have one dedicated indicator on climate resilient indicator. Climate vulnerable ultra poor households are more resilient to climate change induced shock. Our approaches, based on our activities or operation, as you know, the asset we are transferring, and access to information, and how much adaptive capacity our participant, and through the institutional institutional agency link up with the program or with the other agency of government. There we have identified our criteria. The total scoring is 11, and if the household getting score 11 out of 11, then we can call the resilient household. Otherwise, if they lacking behind at least 1 mark, then we don't call the or we don't call the resilient house or resilient building of the PG program. That is the resilient strategy we are developing last year. But after a certain period of time, we measure the resilience at least 3 or 4 to 5 years later. Then we can call the UPG program can actually the resilient program based on the resilient approaches, 4 approaches, and scoring 11 out of 11, and also link up with the BRAC climate resilient framework as is published. You can find through our website. I think you will get the answer.
Yes, thank you so much, Muzammil Bhai. That's very helpful. The next set of questions that we've received are around targeting, both in terms of understanding how do you target through extreme poverty, like is it based on economic indicators, geographical indicators, other multidimensional indicators such as human development. And similarly, if I can expand that to also ask you about how you integrate climate vulnerability in your targeting as well. So if you could speak a bit more to the selection of locations or households and targeting for your programs. Thanks.
Shall I start and then you can take it up with somebody? So I
You
think
can start.
yeah, thank you. So targeting is very key, right? Because we focus on the most vulnerable. So how do we ensure that we actually reach out to them? At the same time, in BRAC UPGI, we're working with governments and through governments. So we have to follow the way they think about the most vulnerable in their communities, and we are working alongside them. So if I can come up with some examples, for example, from India, where we work with tribal communities, and then specifically the particularly vulnerable tribal groups who used to live in forests and are impacted severely by climate change, and of course many other areas as well. It is for them difficult to actually work during the hottest hours of the day, when they were generally going to the forest for some forest produce, but they are not able to do that anymore, or do that at night. I think what we would like to do is to focus on those that are excluded from general programs that are already in place, similarly to how it's actually started in Bangladesh in the 1990s, right? Like we saw that some people were not able to actually get microfinance loans or savings. I think in India, if you see the self-help group movement, the ones that are not actually included in the self-help groups, those are the ones that also government asks us to reach out to and to include. Also, what I briefly mentioned in the presentation, most of the time it goes hand in hand, right? So if we're focusing on those that are the most vulnerable, they're also the most vulnerable to climate shocks. And like the example for working with PPTGs, like tribal communities, already shows how they are actually vulnerable. In Rwanda, it is very different. For example, the government came up with a social registry system, and we just follow the social registry to come up with the most vulnerable there. Yeah, Muzam, maybe from Bangladesh, also some examples.
Thank you. By the way, you clearly mentioned on the example of your UPGI experience, but in our country, UPGI targeting is they are using some tools, FGD and PRA, focus group discussion and participatory rural present. When we are targeting in the field, then our field team, the observe through our inter area through different type of setting with the communities and the local governments, and through FGD, and find out the layer of our category of the participant. The first layer goes the very ultra poor household, and the medium category, and highest category, and also the mentioning there are some criteria we have identified, and the questionnaire depend on the find out the suitable ultra poor household from the questionnaire through the FGD and PRA processes. That is a small process I mentioned.
Sure. Thank you so much. So it sounds like it's a combination of approaches. It could be participatory, it could be based on social registry in some contexts, but really targeting the most vulnerable who are then applicable for both extreme poverty as well as climate resilience interventions. The next set of questions that we've received are actually around sustainability, especially for participants after the program ends, like what kind of monitoring, if any, is done to help see the kind of progress they're making, and also sustainability specifically of the kind of enterprises they start. For example, in a climate vulnerable context, how do these enterprises survive many years after, or in case of an extreme shock? So if you can share more about the kind of measures taken for sustainability, that would be great. Thanks.
I can share one example. As I said in my presentation, all this adaptation technique maintaining the some criteria based on the sustainability. The solution, when we provide the solutions, we think how vulnerability and how much vulnerable of this our participant, which actually the context match with the local context, reduce the vulnerability. Also the culture of these localities and the climate crisis. The intervention we when we provide the adaptation, we monitor the agriculture or livestock produce tangible or measurable productions that we can measure, or we have calculated through our meal team, through our operation team, and also from the back head office team also sometimes monitor the production of the agriculture, production of the livestock, or any hazard are there, and any climatic hazard to reduce the production of the livestock and agriculture. Also, adaptation technique should, when we provide the adaptation technique, that we measure that it could be replicable to the other area, also to the other participant can use these adaptations. Then we can and we can provide it or provided the technology, and all this criteria match. The adaptation should be when we measure adaptation should be the lasting or community owned and economically viable. When you provide the high cost of adaptation technique, the community will not encourage to apply in this other community. But it is low cost and sustainable, then the other community will encourage to apply their other areas. That is our process we can follow from the UPG program.
Yeah, and maybe to add on briefly, I think what we in Bangladesh, the program is running for quite some time, right? And I think the link is also made after the participants or the households are actually graduating from extreme poverty. The link can be made to microfinance services, or they can be part of climate change programs. So it is not to say that after participating in the graduation program, they will not receive any interventions, but they are at a different level, right? So we also see that the livelihoods are growing over time. So it's not that after those 2 years, we're in a certain steady state and this is it. No, we see like that the livelihoods are still growing over time, like from that LSE study that I was briefly mentioning. And this is something where we also offer the support that is aligned with the needs that the households have at that moment in time, which is different from the 2 years ago when they joined the program. So then initially they were excluded from taking up loans, but after those 2 years when their livelihoods are taking off, then they are included and they can take up loans to grow their business further, or they participate in climate change programs if there are specific climate vulnerabilities that we have to address. And I think we would like to see for UPGI, BRAC UPGI, we are in initial stages, right? So we are implementing the program with governments, but we're not there that we have seen many people graduating, and we see like what the next steps are. But that is also like the general philosophy, I would say, that we say, okay, after they graduated, we're thinking about what do you actually need now that you're graduating from extreme poverty? How can we make sure that your livelihood keeps on growing over time, linked to microfinance services? In India, we see that they are then included actually in self-help groups, so that there can also be community-led approaches to climate change. So those kind of things we are exploring.
Great, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but given the high interest of the audience, maybe we can share a set of resources potentially with the larger group, which combines both knowledge work at ADB and BRAC that captures some of the questions that were raised. So hopefully we can do that through the CRPP team. But thank you so much to both the speakers, and I'll pass it to Nisha for the closing.
Great. Thanks, everyone. I think there's also been a poll question that's probably come up a little bit earlier than expected, but that's on basically how much your understanding of ultra-poor, climate-resilient ultra-poor graduation programs has increased. As Palak mentioned, we'll definitely be sharing the resources that Isabel and Baudi sort of explained, the slides, but also these other sort of projects that we've pointed to, including some of the studies that has already been done on this. I know there were a lot of questions, particularly around the measurement, as well as the capacities needed to really take this forward. So we'll definitely be in touch on those issues. And again, thanks so much for joining us today. We hope this has been really helpful and look forward to engaging with you in a different CRPP setting soon. So thanks, everyone.